Do you have any big goals for 2026?
Haven't really thought much about it. I've succeeded in writing a novel every year for the past 3, 4 years. So I feel like my one goal would be to finish a new novel, but it's just like the first draft. It doesn't have to be like on its last edits and stuff like that. So I would love to do that, but not vibing with what story I want to write yet. So I'm kind of in between stories. Then I actually would like to edit my novel that I wrote last year. So, because if the querying for this novel that I'm currently querying isn't working out, then at least I can start querying the next novel. How about you?
Querying. Oh, I'm doing so much querying this year because Destiny is at the point where it's like, I don't feel like I could edit it any better than it already is. So I'm just go through my entire list. Just destroy the list. And in the meantime, I have these other books. I feel like my writing gets better and better each book that I do. So if this is the best that's going to get, I need to be doing something new.
I'm in the same boat as you are in the sense that I'm like, I'm just going to query like all the agents that I can. If it doesn't work out, we move on to the next.
I just feel like that's the only way that you can do it. If you're going to get stuck on one novel, then are you really a writer?
Exactly. And I feel also you just need to trust your gut. Because in my gut, I feel like my baking novel is good enough and it is where it's supposed to be. And I don't want to make any changes to it.
Exactly. So what are you drinking today? Because today I have the most aromatic cherry tea in the world.
I have been at work for like a month or so. So naturally, the kids' sicknesses has come and attacked me again. So I was like, no, thank you very much. So I have my onion, honey, olive oil concoction here to be like, stay away. Thank you very much. I'm ready for this episode. I've been looking forward to it for such a long time. So are you ready for this episode?
I am ready. It's been a year for this.
Hey ho, let's go! Welcome to Tea and Tales. We are happy to have you here with us. I'm Madeleine Aynal.
And I'm Sarah Sampson. We especially want to thank The Ultimate Bookworm and Suzette Smith for listening to our podcast each week and for following us on our social media. Today's episode is long awaited, honestly. It's an agent spotlight, and we are bringing on Sara Megibow from Megibow Literary. So please welcome Sara Megibow.
Thank you for the invitation to join you, and I'm excited to talk about books.
No, we are just as excited. I love it when you actually can see interviews with agents because then you actually can see a little bit about their personality and who they are as a person, which also then kind of makes you decide, okay, do I want to query this person? Sarah and I did an episode 2 seasons ago. It was at the end of season 2, and it was called Rejection Bingo. And one of the things was the words like, I gave serious attention to every ... And I like brought up my one that I got and I read it. And then she brought one up that she read it. I'm sitting there, I'm like, Sarah, I feel like this reads very similar to what I am having. And I was like, who rejected you? And she was like, Sara Megibow. And I was like, me too. It's good that you have like a set rejection letter because then you actually, you're like, yay or nay. Like there's no difficult math about that. That's all.
There's 3 agents here at Megibow Literary, and we were having a long conversation about this last week because, of course, the temptation is to want to try to explain, like, why I'm passing. But one of the big reasons we don't do that is because authors will take our rejections and post them online. And then, there's a snowball effect to that where it's very easy to misconstrue what the actual truth is, and then we get misquoted, and then things get taken out of context. And the advice that we shared among ourselves as agents is to keep the rejection as short and concise and vague as possible, kind of to protect our own butts, which is counterintuitive to how we actually want to be communicating with clients. But then there also is the whole, I'm going to see 15,000 queries this year, and I can't actually personalize all of those rejections. But we talk about this all the time, like how do we tweak our rejections so that it sounds honest, but at the same time vague?
Wow. That's a brilliant perspective that we've never heard before, because I like to think that authors are more, I don't know, understanding than that, and that we're not going to go and put agents on blast if we want an agent. Like, that doesn't seem like, it seems counterintuitive to what we want to do as well.
There's a huge emotional toll on the querying process, on the author. I've been doing this for 20 years. I'm not entirely sure that there is, well, there's certainly no like blanket way to approach all the different kinds of personalities that are pursuing publication. But I don't really know that we even have a grain of an idea of how to approach that emotional toll, because is it incumbent upon the author to trust or understand that their work is being read carefully? No, it's a really opaque process. It's a process that's difficult to understand. It's a process that's difficult to quantify. But holy cow, is it difficult as the agent to deal with how to communicate rejections? And the same thing happens, let's say, when we have a client and the client gets a rejection from an editor, because sometimes the editor will say it's not right for us. And sometimes the editor will say 2 sentences, and occasionally an editor will give back like a paragraph and say, I'm not connecting with blah, blah, blah. And then, of course, my response is, we do not want to edit to that. Right? Just because the editor who passed says, I'm not responding to blah, 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 doesn't mean we should go back into the manuscript and fix blah, 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 because that editor is passed. And we don't want to edit to somebody who's not going to be our partner. So for that process, that's editor to agent to author. So it's the same process when you're querying. You don't want to edit to an agent who is passing because they're not the partner. But all these things happen behind the scenes, and we don't talk about them, and they don't really address the issue, which is that getting rejections from agents and getting rejections later on from editors is really tough. That was my soapbox for the morning, afternoon, evening, whatever. But yes, to your point, I do have a copy-paste response for passes, and then I have a copy-paste response for requests. And my copy-paste response for passes says something like, I'm so sorry, this isn't right for me. So vague and short. And then my copy-paste response for yeses is, I would really like to read the full manuscript of this. Mm-hmm. Then if I read the full manuscript and pass on it, it's the same thing. It's another copy-paste response, which says, thank you so much for sending your full. Unfortunately, it's not right for me. If it's a yes at that point, then I will write a personalized response saying, I'd like to offer representation and set up a time to chat and answer some questions, and I really liked your work, etc. But most of it is copy-paste responses. And again, it's to make sure that I can keep on top of all my work, but also to cover my tuchus.
I think sometimes they just don't understand the amount of queries that agents do get. And as an author, like for me, I love like formal rejections or like general rejection forms, because at least I know. And it's not like that, like, if you don't hear from us in like 12 weeks. And I'm like, is it my 12 weeks or is it like your 12 weeks? Because I feel my 12 weeks feels different than yours.
I mean, do you find that agents are pretty good about having, this is what our query reading process is? Like, what percentage of the time do you feel like if you go to the agent's website that their submission guidelines are at least accurate?
I would have to say that the agents I trust the most to query are the ones that are more specific about their process, and the ones that I get rejections like that from, who are very specific, even if I know it's a form letter, are ones I'm more likely to query with another project later, because I know where I stand and I know that they are being invested. Even if they're not going to invest more time in me, they are invested in the industry and process. And the people who are really vague or like give me one line, or like they say, I got my school bachelor at this, here's the genres I represent, and that's it, all I can find on them. I don't trust I'm going to get good responses, and I'm going to maybe query them later in my process.
That's a really good way of seeing it, for me, seeing it from the author's perspective.
I'm one of those spiteful people where I keep like a whole spreadsheet of like who I queried, what date, what time, like when they should get back to me, if they did say that on their website. And then if they put like a date there and they don't get back to me on that date, then I'm just like, you're blacklisted, not querying you again. Can you stick to a date, please?
Totally acceptable. And I hope that once they go over that date, then you turn their name like a certain color on your spreadsheet, like hot pink, like angry red.
It's like a maroon. And then if someone gets back to me, even if it's just like a formal rejection, I give them a green. I'm like, yay, go.
Okay, so we're all aiming to be green agents. Love that.
Yeah, you are green, so congratulations.
Good, thank you. Otherwise, this would be a short podcast.
We have read that you are a agent that specializes in debut authors, and I've seen that on other agents' pages that if you're a debut author, I specialize in that. I want to be able to help you with that. So what kind of action plan makes you good for being for debut authors, and what expectations do you have?
That's a good question. It's a pretty nuanced answer. First of all, I will say I currently have somewhere around 80 clients, and they are each so different from each other and require such different kinds of being an agent. There is no unilateral what to do best. Certainly, like we were just talking about, responding to emails quickly and professionally is like super high on the list. Does responding to emails quickly make the client more money? No. Not necessarily. So that falls under perceived value rather than actual value, but I still think it's worth my time to respond quickly. So like 24 hours roughly after a client emails me, they're going to hear back from me, even if it's to say, I'm going to shunt this into Friday because I just don't have the brain power for it right now. So after that, I know when we were originally talking about this podcast that you had mentioned my past jobs at GE. I graduated in the dot-com boom and I went directly into tech and I worked in the data analysis department in marketing. I think that specific tool is what drives me to looking for debut authors. So the data analysis behind publishing says, to me at least, that we are not just throwing a dart against the wall. That as agents, as editors, as publishers, as sales directors, as bookstores, as libraries, as reviewers, as everybody who touches books, we are not just throwing a dart against the wall. We are not just drinking martinis and picking, queries out of a hat. That there is a data analysis behind it. So why am I attracted to debut authors is because there's really some hard, cold facts that we can look at that drives the decisions and the opportunities that authors have. I find that if I can get my grubby hands on an author early on in the process, I can explain the processes and set some expectations in an effort that their career can launch forward as profitably as possible. Okay, so what do I mean by that? If I actually can explain to people that Big Five publishing, traditional publishing, is an industry to industry business, then I'm hoping that by explaining that, it will decrease the emotional toll, the frustration, the feeling that publishing is opaque, right? Much of what happens in traditional publishing is because Simon & Schuster is focused on Barnes & Noble. Simon & Schuster is a business-to-business industry. Traditional publishing is a business-to-business industry. It's a print industry. It is an industry in which the Big Five publishers' customer is the retailer. Right? Penguin Random House's customer is not me. Penguin Random House's customer is not really the reader. Penguin Random House's customer is Barnes & Noble, independent bookstores, libraries, Amazon.com, Target, Costco, Walmart, grocery stores, airports, book clubs, subscription boxes, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So much of what goes on behind the scenes is because the publisher is focused on the retailer. Now, if I can get to a debut author in time to explain that, then much of the frustrations which happen in the publishing process, hopefully the weight is lifted a little from the author's shoulders because of that potential frustration so that the author can focus on things like their own life and their families and their day jobs and writing the next book, etc. So that's a really long answer, but that's my hope. It's not that I don't offer representation to previously published authors. It's that I'm hoping that I can insert my soapbox early enough in the career so that the author can focus on their art. And I feel like when we focus on keeping ourselves healthy and our day job and our family and our lives and our writing, then that is a more profitable trajectory than when we are frustrated and upset because the release date has changed, or because returns were high, or because Publishers Weekly didn't review the book, or because a major TikToker didn't publicize the book, or et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
That was just I did not expect that answer at all. And it was so enlightening because the main reason that I want to do traditional publishing is because I know that agents know more about this industry than I do. And I will put my trust in them because they've been in this industry for so long. They know who to go to, know who to avoid, they know how to market your book to editors and to publishers and all those things. And so for you to say that, and it almost sounds like, you want to protect the author a little bit, to be I'm just not going to throw you into the end of the deep ocean and be Good luck. So you started your agency in 2024. It's the Megibow Literary Agency, and you have 3 other agents that work with you, correct?
2 other agents, and I have a Hollywood coordinator.
Can I just say, I love him so much as Aaron, right? I watch him on Instagram all the time.
Yes, he is very charming. He was like, you really, really, really need to have a better social media presence. And I'm like, I literally hate looking at myself talking. He's like, I'll do it. I'm like, done. Yay. Off my plate. Yes, he is fantastic. He's also much better at pitching books in Hollywood than I am, because I'm like not charming. You know, like Hollywood people frequently will do things like match their clothes to their bag and their shoes, inclusive of gender, right? Like everybody looks nice and everybody knows the right people. And I'm just from Colorado, where I wear a lot of like hiking boots. So, you know, I'm just not Hollywood material. And so he is. And so when we go to Hollywood to pitch books, I'm just like, and you will now speak and be charming, and I will sit here and drink the free wine.
Can I just say that's one of my biggest fears about becoming a like good author is I'm like, I don't do that. I grew up in Idaho, potato picking champion. I am not a like girly girl. Since we've brought him up and we're kind of doubling into that, let's talk a little bit about PR. So many agencies like completely hands off when it comes to PR and expect that from the authors. So how far do you and your agency get involved with planning marketing activities and things like that?
Okay, there's another, this is another one that comes with a really nuanced answer.
I love it. I love it.
So if you look at profit strategy for a book, profit strategy for a debut author versus profit strategy for a New York Times bestselling author versus profit strategy for an established author are all very different. Meaning that they're all going to require different kinds of publicity and marketing. Publicity and marketing are 2 different things, and I can get to that in a minute. Same with genre. So a debut author, an established author, a New York Times bestselling author, completely different profit strategy, right? Same with genre. Somebody who writes picture book versus somebody who writes middle grade versus somebody who writes thriller versus somebody who writes romance versus somebody who writes memoir versus somebody who writes cookbook. Totally different profit strategy, totally different publicity and marketing tact. Somebody who writes very quickly, totally different marketing tactics. Somebody who has a big social media platform versus somebody who's brand new, totally different. The agent and the publisher are looking at all of these data points in crafting a publicity and marketing campaign. I can't speak necessarily to what other agencies do or don't do. What I can say is that I will communicate with my clients pretty in depth about what their profit strategy looks like for them, right? So for example, if a person is a debut author writing picture books, then there really is no need to have a gigantic investment in ebook publicity, because there's very few picture books that sell in ebook, right? Like if you sell 100,000 picture books, 100 of them might have been sold in ebook and 99,990 will be sold in print. Conversely, if you write a romance novel and you're an established author, it is possible to see conversion as high as 70% in ebook. Now, audiobooks are also huge in romance, so that 70%, that's not right exactly, but if we look at print and we look at audio and we look at ebook, it might be that the digital conversion is very, very high. Well, if you have a high digital conversion or you want a high digital conversion, then social media publicity can be very, very powerful. So it could be that a TikTok campaign or an advertisement on Facebook or the publisher paying for a Goodreads giveaway or the publisher paying for an Amazon Plus page. Those could be really, really useful. So you're asking, how do we deal with PR and marketing? And it's so specific based on the book and the author and the genre and where the author is in their career. Now, publicity and marketing are different, right? Publicity, so imagine the book is the middle of a wheel and it has spokes, right? If you have a book deal with a traditional publishing house, there's a spoke for editorial. That's the team that is like, okay, we're going to do developmental edits, we're going to do copy edits, we're going to do line edits. There's a spoke for art. That's the cover and the interior design. And if it's a picture book, certainly that's the illustrations. There's a team for marketing, and this is by far the most profitable spoke. And marketing is the team, it's the sales reps that go from the publisher to the bookstores and the libraries to get the bookstores and libraries to purchase as many copies of the books as possible and stock them on their shelves. Bookstore and library distribution is a huge amount of investment. by the publisher. Okay. But the agent and the author never ever interact with that spoke. So publicity is the team that gets reviews and blurbs and perhaps, again, pays for the Amazon Plus page so that when the sales team goes to Barnes & Noble, the sales team has the shiniest package possible. So publicity is like the frosting on the cupcake, and marketing is like the cupcake. They want a really, really shiny, pretty cupcake to take into Barnes & Noble so that the Simon & Schuster sales rep can say, dear Barnes & Noble, look at this book that's coming out this year. It has a review from this person. It has a blurb from this person. They're a debut author. They're in Idaho. All these things to make the book as compelling as possible so that Barnes & Noble says, oh yeah, we'd like to order 5,000 copies and put them in our stores around the country. That's what I spend a lot of my time doing, is explaining that process so that the author knows what's going on behind the scenes. Then I have clients who are active on social media, and I have clients who are not active on social media. The publicity team can leverage what the author does on social media, but unless an author is a 1%er with 100,000 followers, the data today in January of 2026 doesn't seem to indicate that there is any way to go viral. There's no button for going viral. Right? It is not a good profit strategy to say, I have an idea, let's go viral. That's not a profit strategy, right? It's not a publicity strategy. The publicist can say, oh, you've got 8,000 followers on Instagram. Here's a couple of Instagram assets. Keep posting them. Encourage your 8,000 followers to buy the book. We know that perhaps 2 or 3% of your 8,000 followers will buy the book. Great, huzzah, fantastic. But the heavy lift is done behind the scenes with the sales reps going to the retailers. The heavy lift is not done from the author on social media, unless the author is a 1%er with a huge social media platform. I could talk about that for another 2 hours. I'm in no way, shape, or form covering everything that has to do with publicity and marketing in the past 5 minutes. It's just a tip of the iceberg as to what goes on behind the scenes. Our agency tries to explain to the authors so they know what their responsibilities are, what their responsibilities aren't, and what the expectations are.
I think that in itself is brilliant and completely changes perspective, because a lot of people that I have seen on writer groups right now say things like, oh, agents and publishers aren't going to pick you up unless you have 1 million followers. So let's all just follow each other and try to get those numbers up. And what I'm hearing is that doesn't even really equate. That's not as big of an issue for you as an agent as to whether I have a following on social media or not.
I think that's a good question. It can equate. It's not how I do business, although it's certainly how some agents do business, and there's nothing wrong with it. The trick is that I really just don't know how to look at somebody and be like, what you need to do to get a book deal is get 50,000 followers. I don't know how to do that. If an author comes to me with 50,000 followers, that's an asset. Right? That is definitely an asset. But I have 80 clients and I'm not sure any of them have 50,000 followers, and many of them are New York Times bestsellers. I do think it's completely reasonable for an agent to say, I'm looking for authors with 50 to 100,000 followers on whatever. I'm just not one of those agents. One caveat, though, that I didn't mention. If an author is writing nonfiction, it is essential to have a big platform. I don't represent a lot of nonfiction. For fiction, again, there may be agents out there who represent fiction who are looking for large followings. I'm not one of them. What they're doing is not wrong. It's just not what I do.
Yeah, no, we have definitely heard that when you do write nonfiction, you kind of do need to have that following behind you to be able to promote your novel. So let's go a little bit closer to home to you as an agent. So you are not really an editorial agent, but you focus rather on selling the books for your authors. So how ready should an author's pages or writing be for you to take them on as clients? And how involved are you before submitting it to publisher?
So I don't tend to be editorial when I'm looking in the slush pile. If I'm offering representation, that book is going to be ready to go out on submission in a week. Once the author is a client, then I tend to be much more editorial. Like what we talked about before for profit strategy, if an author is writing a picture book and a romance novel and a memoir and a cookbook, it can be a little bit more difficult to monetize. Because in so much of the stuff that I represent in genre fiction, we want to have multiple books under one brand. The profit strategy tends to say that that is a more profitable way to do business. So I'm editorial once we get a book deal. My process is to send a pitch, right? Which sounds a lot like a query letter to an editor. And once they respond and say, yes, I'd like to read it, then I let the author know who it is and what imprint they're with and what publishing house they're with. And then once a week, I will email the author to say no news, which just means no offers, no passes. And that's when we're talking about things like what you're writing next. That's also, many of my clients have come to me with no website. even. And that's kind of the time where the author can work on their website, because I think at the very least, an author should have a website before a book release. Now, not everything that goes on submission gets a book deal, but this is a really good time to work on the website so that if an editor likes the manuscript and then takes the manuscript to their acquisitions team for a potential book offer, at least there's a website with some static information that that editor can see about the author. So we're sort of working on those things while we're waiting. That's my process.
Okay, sounds like a good one. You're doing great. Do you have a set list of publishers and editors you reach out to when you sub your clients' novels, or does it differ all the time?
It differs all the time.
Okay. So you don't have like a favorite editor sitting on your shelf, be like, you?
Of course I have favorite editors, but I'm not going to say who they are.
So then this then goes more to the author and when they work with you. I know what you're going to tell me. You're going to tell me this is a very nuanced answer. I kind of already predict this. So how do writers know whether their query pages just didn't vibe with the agent, or whether there is something wrong with their query or their pages and they need to rework it?
I don't think they do. That goes back to the part we were talking about at the beginning, where this process can be so opaque because there is no answer. I mean, granted, I don't get an answer when an editor passes either. It's not just the author who has to swim around in this sort of dark pond. I would say that the best advice I can give, which I give all the time, is to keep reading and keep writing. So, for example, let's say an author is working on a contemporary young adult novel, and the contemporary young adult novel is on submission to agents. A really great piece of advice would be to read contemporary young adult novels, things that have been published in the past year or two. Read something that's been published by a Big Five publisher, especially something by a debut author. I think that's the most quantitative piece of advice I can give to somebody, because if we are reading in the genre of querying, and there's a voice, there's a pacing, there's tropes, and we can understand those by reading. And then, of course, just keep writing. Probably 90% of my clients didn't get a book deal or an agent on their first query or their second. Most of the clients I represented was their third or their fourth or their fifth book, with very few exceptions. So keep reading, keep writing is really the only way to know whether or not the pages are ready. Obviously, if we send 700 queries and have gotten 700 rejections, odds are the pages aren't ready. But then, and if I say that at a panel, someone's going to say, yeah, but I know somebody who went to 800 and got a book deal. Okay, so I mean, we don't really know.
It's absolutely lovely to hear you say that, because I feel like you were listening in on our chatter before you came in, because we were talking about, we're just going to query this book, and in the meantime, we're going to keep writing because I feel like my writing gets better with every book. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that I hear a lot on Facebook pages and stuff, I haunt them to find what questions people have, and they'll be like, I got 10 rejections and now I'm just going to give up. And I'm like, okay, 10 feels like it's really light. I feel like at 10, I'm going to go back and check my first pages and maybe do a beta read with it, but not just give up or say traditional publishing doesn't work. In your opinion, how many queries should somebody get a rejection on before you start thinking, let me get the next novel ready for querying and maybe put this one back into beta read and rethink it?
This is a guess, right? So don't ink this in stone, but I think there are probably about 1,200 legitimate agents in the US. I don't know the number for worldwide, and I don't know if that number is in stone. But let's say there's 1,200 agents. Well, certainly there are more agents that represent commercial fiction, literary fiction, upmarket fiction than there are that represent science fiction. So if you write science fiction, perhaps 50 is the number. If you write commercial fiction, perhaps 200 is the number. I mean, I think 10 feels light, but there's multiple ways to get a person's story to readers. And traditional publishing is not the only way. It's not my job to say whether it's the best way or not the best way. I would imagine that it's the best way for some books and not the best way for other books. If an author has 10 rejections and finds that traditional publishing is too frustrating or too triggering for them, it's completely acceptable to not pursue traditional publishing anymore. Wattpad does a great job of getting words to readers. Self-publishing does a great job of getting ebooks to readers. There's small presses that are not looking to get books into Target, Costco, Walmart. And so perhaps somebody has written a book that is extremely niche. Like, for example, I live in Boulder, Colorado, and there's a Buddhist university here called Naropa. And Naropa has a publishing arm, a very small publishing arm. But let's say an author has written something that's specifically Buddhist, whether it's fiction or nonfiction. And let's say they've gotten 10 rejections from agents and are frustrated by that. Maybe they pivot immediately and just go to Naropa and say, can you publish this? I can't speak to what's best for people, but I think like what you're saying about trolling through writers' groups is so legitimate because so many people have the same questions. And I think the more that we can share and the more that we can learn about the differences, the pros and the cons to traditional publishing and small press publishing and Wattpad and self-publishing and et cetera, the more options that authors have, right? Because I can't say that somebody who gets an agent and a book deal is automatically better or richer or more widely known or whatever somebody's metric for success is. I can't say that. All I can say is I like working in traditional publishing. I've been working in traditional publishing for 20 years. I like what we do. I don't work in self-publishing. I don't work in small press publishing. Those are the things that are also legitimate and also have pros and cons that I don't do. So I think that if we imagine publishing as a huge circle, I'm only seeing one part of the pie. And what you're seeing is another part of the pie. It's totally legitimate also. And what somebody who sends out 10 query letters is seeing is also legitimate. And what somebody who sends 700 queries is also legitimate. And we just put this all together and we go, well, what is my book and what is my path and what is right for me? I think that's okay. I mean, there's certainly clients of mine that have gotten a book deal and had a book released and hated it and never written another book for traditional publishing. Right? But I also have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of queries a year from people who have said, I self-published and I didn't like that. It's not a binary answer. It's like a big, huge puzzle board. I mean, if somebody 2 years ago, if somebody had been writing, bunny in space erotica, I would have said, I'm not really entirely sure there's a market for that at Barnes & Noble. But sure enough, it's 2026 and these crazy mashup genre books are doing really, really well. I haven't published any bunny in space erotica, but Barnes & Noble is saying that like super big absurdism and escapism is selling really well. So who knows? Maybe that's the next thing.
I love that answer so much because we talked on season 1 about all the different types of publishing and know yourself, know your novel to decide where you want to put it. I feel like that helps remind us not to judge other authors by what we feel like we need to do.
Well, and also, I don't care if it's an author or an agent or an editor or the CEO of Penguin Random House. I don't think anybody should stand up and say, this is what you need to do in order to X, right? Because the you and the need to do are different by person, by book, by month, by everything.
So one thing that I really loved when I was researching you, I'm not a stalker, I promise, was for work purposes, is that in 2011-ish, you did 10 queries in 10 tweets, which I thought was quite fun. And I feel as an author, such a fun and nice way to learn how literary agents think and how you can approach your querying and your query later. So kind of what inspired you to do that, and would you do that again? Not necessarily on Twitter, but somewhere else.
Well, I wouldn't do anything on Twitter ever again. 2011 as sort of how is social media now influencing publishing? Back then it was influencing publishing in a way that's very different than in 2026. So would I do it again in 2026? No. What was I thinking in 2010, 2011 was, how can I make my job less opaque and what value can I bring to social media as an agent? I found it fun too. Thank you. Unfortunately, it became a construct where the question of, do these authors, have they really given the agent permission to say anything about their query in public, became a serious question. Obviously, I never identified any of the queries, but as Twitter evolved, it became less appropriate. I'll just put it that way. So would I do it again? No. How can I leverage social media now in 2026 to bring more value add to the general author population? I don't know, right? And again, it goes back to what we were talking about at the beginning, because if I write something down or I say something on a podcast or I say something on a video or I say something on a panel, it can be quoted, it can be dissected, it can be reshared, it can be pulled apart, it can be taken out of context, it can be anything. And my experience with social media over the past, say, 5 years has been that for some reason, it always ends up being taken out of context in a bad way. And so I don't know how to overcome that negative trajectory of social media to bring value to authors again. Part of it is having Aaron on board doing Instagram Reels. To date, we have not had any trolls that I have seen, right? I mean, we haven't had any negative backlash to anything that's been posted, either in terms of context or content. I'm really aware of the potential for danger on social media. And so, but I don't think Instagram Reels are nearly as impactful as 10 queries and 10 tweets were. But I'm much more concerned about safety, Aaron's safety, my client's safety now than I would have been in 2010. So I don't actually care if we go viral with his Reels. I would much rather him be safe. And maybe there's another iteration of something where there's a value add for authors. I don't know what that is.
Well, can I just say, who not like Aaron?
He comes from, he's a DJ, he comes from the music industry, he comes from the photography industry, and he's really passionate about online content. And it's cool to watch because I'm not. What kind of people do we want around us? We want people who know something completely different or people who disagree with us, right?
And I feel like that's also another answer of it depends on the moment and as we go, because I see these trends that come on that are like, everybody loves it until they don't.
Yeah.
And then suddenly they really don't love it. And it's hard to balance that out.
Yep. Well, do you remember like 2011, 2012, and especially romance authors, they were given 10, 20, 30 guest blog posts to write. And that was the thing that was going to bump. And then there was that phase where if we put a short story into an anthology with another author who's a New York Times bestseller, it's going to hit the list. Exactly what you just said, that there's these fads and these phases that come and go. And of course, publishing wants to jump on those things. For a while, we want to get a big influencer, a big TikTok influencer to feature a book. Okay, well, the trick is there's 1 or 2% of people on TikTok are truly big influencers. And those 1 or 2% get thousands of pitches per week. So it got flooded. Now, does it still work? Yeah, it probably does. I can't guarantee to an author when I offer representation that the 1%ers are going to review the book. I mean, it's similar to if Oprah gave your book a blurb, boy, that's going to sell books. That's going to work. Oprah sees thousands and thousands and thousands of pitches. So it's like, okay, well, we know what works, but it is so saturated that we can't guarantee we can get that access. So what's the next thing? I don't know.
Who knows? Who knows? Online conferences seem to be big right now. I don't know.
Agreed.
This may seem like a really, really weird question.
Excellent.
When we were recording the first episode of this season, we were doing a book bingo. And we came to a question that said, have you ever written the end on your manuscript? And we both looked at each other like, well, yeah, I think I've written it before, but I always delete it before I send a full manuscript to any agent because I heard that that's taboo or that's bad. Is this another one of those depends on the agent things or it's a fad thing?
I've never heard that one. I don't know. I don't have any auto accept or auto reject. I don't have any of those. Somebody spells my name wrong, it's not an automatic rejection. If somebody says, this is 4 billion words long, that's not an automatic rejection. Obviously, if somebody says, I'm writing a cookbook, well, I don't represent cookbooks, so okay, fine, that's an automatic rejection. I call it's like deal maker or deal breaker. I've never heard of that one, the end.
So basically, like if someone sends you, like if you ask for a full request and they send you their entire manuscript and it ends with the end, you're not going to be like, I know it's the end, like why are you telling me it's the end?
Yeah. No. Well, and also people will say prologues are a deal breaker. Nope, not for me.
Oh, okay. I'm loving this right now.
There's just, I mean, again, I don't know what other agents do, but I don't really have any deal breakers.
I think that's brilliant. Like, felt like a little thing to me. I'm like, why would somebody reject it for 2 words at the very end of the manuscript? I don't get it. But it might be one of those things. A lot of things in the author community are rumors.
Oh, sure.
They're just what people think other people want because one person somewhere said, I don't really like it when people do that. And so now it's suddenly, oh, you shouldn't ever.
I mean, I like it when people include their website in their query, but it's not a deal breaker if somebody doesn't. And again, like I said, a lot of authors don't have one. Many times when I speak at conferences, I think we talk about the idea of competition, right? That it's not that a manuscript has the word the end on it that an author can understand. It's that an imprint at Simon & Schuster is going to be allowed to publish 30 books a year. They have already contracted 20 of those books. They have 10 spots, and they have hundreds of submissions for those 10 spots. An agent is going to get thousands or tens of thousands of queries and offer representation to 5 or 10 or 15 of them. I don't believe that publishing is a zero-sum game. I do believe it's very, very, very competitive. Back to the example of Simon & Schuster. Let's say they have 10 spots. They're not going to put 10 contemporary romances in those 10 spots. They need a few contemporary romances and a few historical romances and a few paranormal romances and a few that are the second book in a series and a few that are the first book in the series and a few that are by a New York Times bestselling author. There has to be an inclusion and diversity among the authors. It cannot be all 10 of these books are written by cis, white, heterosexual authors with cis white heterosexual protagonists. We call that list balancing. So it's not about the words "the end," and it's not about the words "the prologue," and it's not about necessarily about did the character make a poor decision in their character motivation on page 200. Certainly, most of those things could be fixed with an edit. It's the craft has to be beyond spectacular in order to compete. And the story has to be beyond unique in order to compete. And then a unique, well-crafted story has to go into the mix with all the other books that are being pitched. And it has to fit in the catalog according to list balancing. So an exceptionally well-crafted, totally unique story could get a rejection because that imprint already has 2 books that are too similar to it in their catalog. Or an exceptionally well-crafted book that's totally unique could get a pass because that author has a print track record and their most recent book didn't sell very well. Or hundreds and hundreds of other data points. So when an author is looking for a reason why they got a pass or why they got an offer, again, it isn't a binary answer. The editor will get on a phone, the agent will get on a phone and say, I love this book, I'd like to represent it, I'd like to publish it. And even if we had a 1-hour conversation, we're not going to touch on all the factors that go into a pass or an offer. So to some extent, we have to revert to keep reading and keep writing because we can explain publishing all day long and we cannot control it.
That makes so much sense when you look at the numbers. Thank you, Sarah, for joining us today. I think I have learned more things than my brain could possibly hold, and I'm glad I get to edit the episode and listen to it all over again.
Thank you. It's really fun to talk about publishing with book people. So thank you for the invitation. I'll just sign off by saying, here's to many happy readers.
Yeah.
I love it. And if you're looking for more from Sara Megibow, you can go and find her and the other agents at her agency at megibowliteraryagency.com. We like to keep it short here on Tea and Tales. Get your fingers back on the keyboard and your pens back on paper.
And if you like what we are doing here, if you love the amazing guests that we have on and the topics that we are discussing, go follow us on Instagram, Threads, and Facebook at Tea and Tales Podcast and on Twitter/X and TikTok at Podcast Tea Tales. And then go to that purple icon on your device, go to Spotify and go give us 5 stars and please leave comments. Tell us how much you love Sara Megibow and how much you want to query her, how applicable the topics is that we are discussing so that you can help the algorithm and help us to go up at some moment.
And then make sure you come and join us again because next week we will be talking about the mentor-ally trope in middle grade and young adult with our guest, Daniela Clayton. Even more, we have a episode coming up with Jessie Cuniff. We will be doing another blurb giveaway with Jessie. So if you are a children's, young adult, or middle grade author and want to get into that drawing, please follow us, comment, and watch for our messages on how to join the drawing. Happy writing!
Bye!